Well, let's talk a little bit about the context. In case anyone missed the Mehdi Hassan interview with Jill Stein, Mehdi Hassan asked Jill, will you call Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad war criminals? Jill Stein gave a very weird, defensive, and overly convoluted answer where she basically refused to. She said things like, in so many words, they are war criminals, but she wouldn't just say, yes, of course, obviously, they're war criminals. Next question, let's move on. That's the obvious answer. Anyway, she was rightly criticized for that. It was a completely weird answer. And given the fact that there is that photo of Jill Stein at the table with Putin in Russia, a lot of people understandably have questions about her position as it relates to the war in Ukraine and as it relates to Putin, what she thinks about the guy. So, even if you think that Jill Stein is 100% innocent, even just from an optics perspective, it was a terrible answer because it created the optics that there might be something shady going on. There might be something suspicious happening. Why is Jill Stein unwilling to call a spade here in this situation when Mehdi Hassan is just begging her to be honest about it? Either way, after a lot of pushback in the media from mainstream commentators and people on the left like Zach and I, it wasn't just people on CNN. A lot of people that are actually principled anti-war leftists like ourselves were like, hey, this is a bad look. This is not an anti-imperialist response. But anyway, so Jill Stein, she kind of buckled to the pressure here and put out this statement. We condemn all war criminals, including Benjamin Netanyahu, Vladimir Putin, Bashar al-Assad. And then she has to, of course, throw in all the Democrats too, like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and then, Donald Trump, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, George Bush, Dick Cheney, and many more, and many more. You can look at the footnotes to find the entire collection of war criminals. But yeah, she says, we also recognize the urgent need for diplomacy to prevent World War III, and then release this larger statement where she goes on to, talk about.
After a recent interview which did not provide the opportunity for nuanced and serious discussion of important and controversial topics, we wanted to take this opportunity to clarify our stance on key issues, particularly any misunderstanding regarding our comments about Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad. We've already arrived at, I'm not a crook. Okay, they've already arrived at, like, we're on the back pedal for something that you should never have to be on the back pedal for. Hey, a lot of you guys might think that we are sympathetic to our nation's leading enemies of the globe and how we might be on their dole, but we're not, I promise. Okay, so it doesn't really matter after that. Your campaign is cooked, but we're going to continue to indulge them, and they, go on and condemn Putin and Assad, responsible for immense suffering, right?
So she had to put out this whole statement to clean things up, to make it clear that, yes, the Green Party believes Putin to be a war criminal, believes Bashar al-Assad to be a war criminal responsible for immense suffering and devastation. As they put it here, Putin's military intervention in Syria, supporting Assad's brutal suppression of the Syrian people's uprising, is a stark example of his disregard for human rights. But either way, apparently, she couldn't stand the criticism. She came out here, clarified her position, and ultimately I think it's a good thing that she did this. I think that as far as Jill Stein's credibility is concerned, this is definitely the right move. I'm glad she said, hey, all right, I don't want this going around here that I'm a Putin simp or something, like I'm a freaking Jackson Hinkle listener, right? I need to be clear about this. But Zach, Jill Stein, many of the people online that support her, as we've talked about, the gray zone leftists, the Danny Haifongs, the Max Blumenthals, the Sabby Sabs, the Nick Cruzes, the Caleb Maupins,
the MAGA left,
the Scott Ritters, Richard Medhurst. You guys know the crew. You guys know the crew.
Motley crew.
It's a motley crew. Anyway, they were not happy, guys. They were not happy. And just to clarify, because not everyone's as terminally online as Zach and I, not everyone scrolls Twitter as much as Zach and I. We know that there are people in our audience and in general that support the Green Party who aren't a part of that faction we just mentioned. We know there's a lot of people whose heart's in the right place that agree with what Jill Stein says. They don't know about the gray zone. They don't care about Jimmy Dore. None of this is relevant to them. We understand that. We get it. It's an understandable conclusion to come to. I'm not judging you. But when you're talking about the online battlefield, when you're talking about Twitter, this is absolutely relevant to the conversation. And it explains the audience capture that we see Jill Stein start to fight back against here with this post. Who knows if she'll double down again or if she'll cower going forward to some of the insanity that we're about to take a look at from some of the aforementioned characters. Let's take a look at some of these unhinged response guys from, I mean, it's just all of the usual suspects coming
George
right
Galloway.
out of the woodwork, guys, coming right out of the woodwork. So here's George Galloway. You didn't have to do this. It is a mistake. If you don't run, they can chase you. This he's talking about a freaking tweet. It sounds like he's talking to someone who's like about to rob a bank to like feed their family, and he's like, "Bro, you don't have to do this, man. There's other options. You don't have to go down this road."
Danny Haifong, this guy I genuinely believe gets paid from some foreign government.
100%.
The pressure has been intense from bad faith actors in the mainstream media, but lumping in Putin and Assad, two leaders in country under direct attack from empire with the very neocons conducting the attack is a profound mistake, deeply disappointing. Yeah, getting honest analysis from this guy is like expecting to get honest analysis on Ukraine from Dylan Burns. It's like they're just ideologically they're not going to do it because they're so vested in uplifting like these foreign governments for some reason. I mean, it's crazy. What the do I or Gavin have a reason to defend Bashar al-Assad for? Like, you have to be a crazy person. Not only do I disagree with that guy politically on basically everything.
Oh, here's a good one from Jackson Hinkle. You.
Yeah.
Only a lying Zionist piece of shit would put Presidents Putin and Assad in the same sentence as Netanyahu. So he's literally calling Jill Stein a Zionist, even though she's running a whole campaign. The number one issue she's running on is Gaza. The number one thing she pushes back on is Zionism. As much strategic disagreements as Zach and I have with Jill Stein, you can't question her moral clarity in regard to Zionism, at least not in my opinion. It's very obvious where she stands on that. She's made it clear over and over and over again.
As you, Brent, mentioned, she grew up in a Zionist household. This is Jackson Hinkle signaling to all of his goons that don't forget that you grew up Jewish. That's what this is saying.
Here's one that I think is pretty funny from Scott Ritter, another convicted sexual predator. This guy is a big hit with the pro-Russia crowd, guys. They love to trot out Scott Ritter. They think he's like he's like the Noam Chomsky of the quote unquote anti-imperialist quote unquote left.
Just don't look at his search history.
Yeah, don't look at his search history. Anyway, Scott Ritter chimes in. I think you lost a good part of your base on this one. Unforced error. And again, unfortunately, he might be right, Zach, because as we've talked about, the Green Party is so online. And as far as the people that actually support them, not just the people that show up to cast a protest vote and have no idea what the Green Party actually is, but the people that actually are invested in this movement and that participate in it online. Unfortunately, I think Scott Ritter's right. I think that with this statement, Jill Stein lost a lot of those people. It's not to say she lost them permanently. It's not to say that they won't ultimately vote for Jill Stein, but I think it is true. I think Scott Ritter is right that probably the majority of the online Jill Stein supporters, they disagree with the statement. They actually agree with the Jackson Hinkles of the world and the Scott Ritters of the world. They think that, Putin is based and that Ukraine is a rabid dog that needs to be put down. That was Scott Ritter's quote. I think that's actually what they believe. And again, it's hilarious because these are the people that will tell you the most loudly and proudly that they're anti-war. And they'll browbeat you the most aggressively for not agreeing with them. When again, it's them that are actually repeating pro-war talking points. They're the ones repeating pro-war talking points, like Scott Ritter and like Danny Haifong. They're the ones defending imperialism. Jackson Hinkle's the one that literally does propaganda for war criminals and calls them based. But they're the anti-war people, and they'll gaslight you into believing it. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, of course. That's what the role they play is. And there's a reason. One, we know for a fact Jackson Hinkle is on the payroll of foreign governments, right? He has 100% been accepting money from both. Well, let's just say we know for a fact Russia. If you scroll back up, though, there's more from Scott Ritter. This guy goes on a tear. Let's hear from old Scott the Diddler. Okay, for people who don't know, Google Scott Ritter arrest. This is their, as Gavin said, this is like their Chris Hedges. This is like their intellectual thought leader. They think this guy's a genius, and he's not. He's just like a paid asset that lives in a creepy ass suburban house that's probably too close to children for anybody's comfort. Anyway, let's hear it. Jill, delete this statement. Instead, come up with something like the article written by RFK Jr. and Donald Trump Jr. Tell us how you negotiate with Russia. Tell us how you prevent nuclear war. Again, these guys never, ever bring up the fact that Israel also has nukes, that Benjamin Netanyahu has nukes, and that makes this argument that they have totally logically inconsistent. It's just absolute vapor, guys. It's a nothing burger. Okay, it's a Krispy Kreme donut. It's actually not. It's like one that's been mildewing for weeks because it looks shitty on the outside and it won't satiate you. Tell us how you prevent a nuclear war. That is the existence question of our time. Existential is what he means. He's so fired up he can't even think straight. Nothing else matters if we are not alive to make it matter. I agree, Scott. That's why I'm not interested in your brainless takes. But he's got another one, Gavin. He keeps going. He hasn't had enough.
Yeah, he popped up 3 tweets.
Jeez, how Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad belong on this list. Can you articulate their crimes? He's going to do what Aaron Maté always does, which is debate the semantics of the chemical weapons attack and use that as an excuse to say that any criticism of Bashar al-Assad.
Therefore, he's never done anything wrong.
Yeah.
Therefore, I mein, even if that is true, yeah, that doesn't excuse
a single whistleblower from the OPCW, Gavin. Yeah. He's off the hook. It's just the imperialist propagandists that want you to think Bashar al-Assad is a bad man. By putting them on this list, you are simply playing the game as those you ostensibly criticize. Yes, you're not truly a traitor to your country like I am. Anya Paramply, I didn't even have to see her response to know that she would be in these replies. If you guys remember, scroll back, I called her out by name. I knew this is where she would be.
Yep. She's also definitely
it's an awful statement to call people war criminals who are war criminals. I thought this was a pro-peace ticket, Gavin. I am a pro-peace guy. Are you a pro-peace guy?
I do, in fact, consider myself to be pro-peace. Yeah, that's why I'm not a big fan of Russia, Zach. They're currently engaged in a literal war of aggression. Let's take a look here. As Zach said, as I told y'all, this is why Jill Stein gish-galloped on the issue of Putin and Assad being war criminals, because here you have Sabby Sabs, who is potentially the biggest Jill Stein supporter on YouTube.
Sorry, Brianna.
Sorry, Brianna. I don't think there's anyone else that gets as many views who spreads the gospel of Jill Stein other than Sabrina. I really do think that at this point she's probably their number one supporter on the platform. And
which is even crazy, by the way, guys, because we followed her entire arc.
Yeah, we have. Anyway, she chimes in. I highly recommend reaching out to Aaron Mate or what's her name, Margaret Kimberly, and talking to them about Assad and Syria. So she's a little bit more tempered. She doesn't say you Zionist pig like Jackson Hinkle or anything like that, but still very condescending. Come on. If I'm Jill Stein, I would be like, bitch, like, who do you think I am? Like, I'm a 70-year-old woman who's obviously had a lot of experience, who's run for president like 17 million times. Don't tell me I need to talk to your dumbass friends. Don't tell me I need to have Aaron Mate and Margaret Kimberly on my show because I don't know what I'm talking about. No, you don't think that Jill Stein knows? And now see, I'm defending Jill Stein because she's actually right here. Obviously, Vladimir Putin's a war criminal. Obviously, Bashar al-Assad is a war criminal. Jill Stein knows what she's talking about. And again, for the first time in her entire presidential campaign in this election cycle, I'm actually impressed by her standing up to this faction of the internet, these exact sort of people who, again, they pretend to respect Jill Stein, they pretend to think she's smart, they pretend to think she's an anti-war icon, but then she actually speaks for herself, has an independent thought, and all of a sudden all of that respect goes out the window. All of it dissipates, and all of a sudden it's, actually you need to have on my quack friends to educate you and to set you straight before you can have an opinion, before you're qualified to have an opinion on the subject matter of major world leaders. Well, if you don't think that Jill Stein is qualified to have an opinion on these people and label them as she sees fit, then why the hell are you supporting her candidacy? Why the hell are you such a cheerleader for the Green Party? Why are you aggressively browbeating into submission anyone that sees this differently than you? If you can't even trust Jill Stein to accurately label major world leaders as war criminals or not.
Yeah, it all falls apart. And I want to add one other thing, Gavin. Actually, I'll add 2 things because I like to talk a lot and I have an anecdote about Margaret Kimberly. First, do you know what these folks always say? The people who are the loudest, proudest, black-pilled, Jimmy Dore, Do Dissidents, obviously Sabby Sabs, the people, Revolutionary Blackout Network, they always low-key praise Donald Trump. by saying that he didn't start any new wars while he was president, right? Implying that Joe Biden started a war while he was president. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gavin, I'm not very smart, but the war in Ukraine, who started it?
Putin.
What? So wait, who started the war in Europe? Oh my God, it was Putin. And oh, that wasn't a crime, guys. Actually, because you see, the sun was in his eyes, and the encroachment of NATO, and he had to kill all these grandma and children. You know what I'm saying? So I was just like, he's playing chess, not checkers. Guys.
It was actually Dr. Fauci who started the war in Ukraine.
I forgot,
obviously, bro.
And I'll tell you what, guys. When it comes to Aaron Mate, we had an interesting trajectory with the guy. I started really following him during the Russiagate stuff, which I did think he had a lot of good reporting on him.
He used to be reasonable. At one point, he was like saying he would vote for Joe Biden and stuff. Remember that?
Yeah, and he used to write in like mainstream publications. I remember when the Syria story first came out, it was published in the Nation magazine because D.D. Gutenplant, who was the editor at that time, was like, "This is pretty well argued. This is a real scoop. Let's publish it." And that was when there was a whistleblower for the OPCW that challenged the description of the chemical weapons attack. Now, does that mean that they were arguing in the Nation that Bashar al-Assad was a great guy? Were they arguing that he was not a war criminal? No, they were arguing that the narrative and the justification that the United States was going to use as an impetus for further attack and destruction of Syria, which is wrong and immoral, and one of the stains of many of the Obama administration, the way that they navigated Syrian foreign policy, right? It was a dominating portion of the last 2 years of Obama.
It's kind of like saying that you don't think Putin is guilty of having blown up the Nord Stream pipeline, right? But that doesn't mean he's off the hook for everything else he's done, all the war crimes he's committed. You can believe two things at once.
Exactly. And we were responsible for blowing up the Nord Stream.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that was another false flag.
Exactly. And so what happens is people like Aaron Mate, they will write about those things, but then they'll use it to like kind of coyly, and Aaron's a sophisticated guy. He's actually not a dumbass. He'll thread the needle. Some of these other guys, they just come right out and say it, and it makes Aaron look bad. But anyway, over time, that's what they do. People will take like one or two words out of what was Aaron's well-researched and thoughtful article, right? And then he'll go ahead and justify it and blow smoke up their ass, and he loves it. He has no issue with them completely misrepresenting his reporting at all, right? That's where he got his clout and credibility from. But when you really take it to its natural conclusion, like, oh, this means Bashar al-Assad is based, like, of course not. You have to be brain dead.
Anyway, let's take one more look at this thread before we move on, guys. We have some super chats and then another story to talk about. But yeah, this was the Post Left Watch tweet where he rounded up some of the responses. I don't know if we missed any. Here's Nick saying, they're still going to call you a Russian puppet, even if you repeat their lies about Putin. Putin. So it's like, what? You can't. Come on, bro. Come on. You really don't think it's accurate to call Vladimir Putin a war criminal? How can you say that with a straight face? How can you say that with a straight face? Yeah. I mean, we all know what's really going on, but come on, man. I mean, how does anyone take you seriously? How does anyone that calls himself an anti-war leftist take you seriously?
They don't.
It's crazy.
Any serious person doesn't take these people seriously.
Well, that's why it's just so mind-blowing that Jill Stein and the Green Party are associated with them in the first place. Yeah, that's what I've come to realize. But yeah, I guess that's basically the majority of those responses. Pretty funny stuff, though. Pretty funny stuff, because we called this 100%. We called this to a T. You can listen to our show when we reacted to Mehdi Hassan, when we reacted to that clip where she waffled and refused to just straight up call him a war criminal. We said, this is why. We said, if she did, this would happen. And then literally like a week later, it did.